The winter of 1882 was merciless in the Montana Territory. Snow fell in sheets so thick that a man could barely see his own hand stretched before him, and the wind howled through the valleys like a wounded animal crying out its last breath. It was in this unforgiving landscape that Samuel Crawford found himself standing at the edge of his ranch, holding a bundle that contained his entire world and his deepest fear. His wife, Mary, had died 3 days ago, bringing their son into the world. The baby had survived, but Samuel knew nothing about caring for an infant. He was a rancher, a man who understood cattle and horses, soil and weather. The tiny, squalling creature in his arms was as foreign to him as the moon, and just as unreachable in terms of his understanding. The town doctor had come and gone, leaving Samuel with little hope and less help. "You need a wet nurse," the doctor had said bluntly. "That baby needs mother's milk, and he needs it soon, or he won't last the week." Then he had ridden away into the blizzard, leaving Samuel alone with his grief and his helpless son. Samuel had sent word to the neighboring ranches and into town, desperately seeking a woman who could help. But this was frontier Montana, where women were scarce and nursing mothers even more so. Those who existed were already caring for their own children and had nothing to spare for a stranger's infant, even one as pitiful as his. He had almost given up hope when he heard the knock at his door that evening. The sound was so soft he almost missed it over the crackling of the fireplace and the infant's weak cries. When he opened the door, he found a figure standing in the snow, wrapped in a thin shawl that was completely inadequate for the weather. It was a Chinese woman, no more than 20 years old, with exhausted eyes that had seen too much hardship for her young age. She was shivering, her lips nearly blue from the cold, but she stood straight and met his gaze without flinching. "Please, sir," she said in careful English, each word pronounced with concentration. "I hear in town you need help with baby. I can help. I have milk. My baby died 2 days ago. But I still have milk." Samuel stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. A Chinese woman, here at his door, offering to nurse his son. In any other circumstance, he might have turned her away without a second thought. The prejudice against Chinese immigrants ran deep in the Montana Territory. They were blamed for taking jobs, for being different, for existing in a space that many believed should belong only to white settlers. But as his son let out another weak cry from the cradle near the fire, Samuel felt something shift inside him. This was a mother who had lost her child, standing in a blizzard, offering to give life to his son. What kind of man would he be to turn away such an offer because of the color of her skin or the shape of her eyes? "Come inside," he said gruffly, stepping back from the door. "You'll freeze to death out there." She entered hesitantly, as if expecting him to change his mind at any moment. Her eyes went immediately to the crying infant, and Samuel saw something profound flash across her face. Pain, longing, and a deep maternal instinct that transcended language and culture. "What's your name?" Samuel asked as he closed the door against the storm. "Mei Lin," she replied softly. "It mean beautiful jade. But here, in America, no one think Chinese girl is beautiful. No one want Chinese girl for anything." She paused, then added with quiet dignity, "But I can nurse your newborn. I am good mother. Was good mother." The grief in her voice was unmistakable, and Samuel felt his own loss echo in response. They were two people who had lost everything that mattered, standing in a small cabin while the winter raged outside. "My son," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "His name is Thomas. After my father. He's 3 days old, and he's dying because I don't know how to feed him proper." Mei Lin moved toward the cradle without another word. She looked down at the infant with expert eyes, noting his weakened state, his pale color, the way his cries were becoming more feeble. Without asking permission, she reached down and lifted him gently, cradling him against her chest with the practiced ease of a mother who had done this 1,000 times before. "He is very weak," she said, a note of concern in her voice. "But not too late. I feed him now, yes." Samuel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with stoking the fire and trying to control the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Behind him, he heard the rustling of fabric, and then silence, and then the most beautiful sound he had heard in 3 days. His son, nursing contentedly. When he finally turned back around, he saw Mei Lin sitting in the rocking chair by the fire, his son cradled in her arms, feeding peacefully. Tears were streaming down her face, silent and unstoppable, but she was smiling at the infant with such tenderness that Samuel felt his own eyes begin to burn. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackling fire, the wind outside, and the soft noises of a baby finally getting the nourishment he desperately needed. When Thomas finally fell asleep, full and content, Mei Lin carefully placed him back in his cradle and covered him with a blanket. "He will need to eat again in few hours," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He should go now. He come back tomorrow if you want." "Where will you go?" Samuel asked, suddenly concerned. "It's dark, and the storm hasn't let up." Mei Lin looked down at her hands. "I have small room in town. Above laundry. Very small, very cold, but is all I can afford." Samuel made a decision in that moment, one that he knew would bring him trouble from the townspeople, but one that felt more right than anything he had felt since Mary's death. "No," he said firmly. "You will stay here. Thomas needs to be fed regular, and I can't have you traveling back and forth in this weather. Besides," he paused, struggling to find the right words. "Besides, this house is too empty now. Too quiet. Having you here, helping with the baby, it would be—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Mei Lin looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You want me to stay here? But people in town, they will talk. They will say bad things. Chinese woman in white man's house. They will not understand." "Let them talk," Samuel said, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. "My son is alive because of you. You came here in a blizzard, having just lost your own child, to help a stranger. That takes more courage and kindness than anyone in that town has ever shown. If they have a problem with you being here, they can take it up with me." For the first time, Mei Lin's stern expression cracked, and Samuel saw vulnerability beneath. "You are sure? Because I have nowhere else. My husband, he died in mine accident 6 months ago. My baby, she died from fever 2 days ago. I have no family here, no friends. Chinese are not welcome in most places. If you let me stay, I will work hard. I will take care of baby. I will cook, clean, anything you need. I ask only for food and warm place to sleep." Samuel shook his head. "You're not a servant, Mei Lin. You're saving my son's life. You'll stay here as—" He searched for the right word, "as family. You'll have your own room, and you'll be paid fair wages for your help. Is that acceptable?" Mei Lin's eyes widened in disbelief. In all her time in America, no one had treated her with such basic human dignity. She had been scorned, spat upon, turned away from shops and churches. She had been called terrible names and told to go back to where she came from, even though going back was impossible. And now this grieving rancher, this man who had every reason to share the prejudices of his neighbors, was offering her respect and a place to call home. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, that is acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Thank you. Call me Samuel," he said. "If we're going to be living under the same roof and raising this boy together, we might as well use first names." Over the following weeks, an unlikely household took shape in that remote ranch. Mei Lin proved to be everything she had promised and more. She cared for Thomas with a devotion that was both heartbreaking and beautiful to witness. Samuel could see that every time she fed the baby or sang to him in soft Chinese lullabies, she was also mourning her own lost daughter. But rather than letting that grief consume her, she channeled it into giving Thomas the love and care he needed to thrive. Thomas flourished under her attention. Within a week, his color had improved, and he was gaining weight. Within 2 weeks, he was a healthy, robust infant who seemed to smile whenever he heard Mei Lin's voice. Samuel found himself watching them sometimes, this Chinese woman and his American son, and feeling grateful beyond words that she had appeared at his door that snowy night. But Mei Lin's presence did not go unnoticed or unremarked upon in town. When Samuel made his weekly trip for supplies, he was met with cold stares and whispered conversations that stopped when he approached. The shopkeeper served him but made pointed comments about the proper way to run a household, and what people might think. Samuel ignored them all. He had learned something important in those weeks. That human decency mattered more than social acceptance, that love and care knew no racial boundaries, and that sometimes the most unlikely people could become family. One evening, as Mei Lin rocked Thomas to sleep and Samuel sat nearby mending a harness, she spoke quietly into the comfortable silence that had developed between them. "You know," she said, "in China we have saying, a child's life is worth more than all the gold in the emperor's treasury. I think about that when I hold Thomas. I think about my daughter too, and I am sad. But I am also grateful. Grateful that I can give this life, this love, even though my own baby is gone. Does that make sense?" Samuel looked up from his work, his eyes meeting hers across the firelight. "Yes," he said simply. "It makes perfect sense. And I'm grateful too, Mei Lin. You didn't just save Thomas's life. You saved mine too. This house was dying along with him. You brought it back to life." Mei Lin smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Then we save each other," she said. "And we save Thomas together. Is good arrangement, I think." "It's better than good," Samuel replied. "It's family." Outside, the Montana winter continued its assault on the land. But inside the small ranch house, warmth and life and hope had taken root. A grieving rancher, an immigrant woman who had lost everything, and a newborn baby who needed them both. They had formed something that defied the prejudices and expectations of their time. They had formed a family built not on blood or tradition, but on compassion, respect, and the simple human need to care for one another. And as spring eventually came to Montana, melting the snow and bringing new life to the land, that unlikely family grew stronger, proving that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the harshest conditions, and that family is defined not by how we look or where we come from, but by how we love and care for each other when it matters most.